is self-healing? This is a term that I feel it's important to define. I will be speaking about this every Tuesday in my Self-Healing Tips Tuesdays, which I know is a mouthful, but we've already looked at 2 applications of how we can use that in the previous week. So in the first week, I had a guided journaling exercise on transforming triggers. Last week, I looked at 6 abundance blockers and what you can do to make space to allow abundance into your life and receive it. But I think it's also really important to define what I mean when I'm talking about self-healing, because it's a term that I use a lot. It's also the name I give my consults and sessions. I call them self-healing consults. Rather than looking at it as a typical form of counseling or advising, I want to emphasize that the work is being done by the client who is receiving guidance and then applying it and integrating it themselves in their daily life. So they are not just working through things while they're in session with me, they are working through them on their own on a daily basis. So what self-healing is, well, let's first talk about what it isn't. It is not a replacement for science or mainstream medicine or outside therapists or healers. I think that it's important to get out of this either or mentality that you're either, taking responsibility for your own health and well-being, or else you're dependent on outside practitioners to guide you or heal you or help you or take you by the hand. To me, these work in conjunction with each other. So this is what I mean when I say they work together. I see self-healing practices or rituals as the ultimate form of preventative medicine. When you're taking a daily inventory of yourself emotionally, physically, spiritually, you are more likely to be in tune with anything that's out of balance. So if you're repressing a difficult emotion, that could then manifest as negative stress, and which can then lead to illness. If you have a kind of physical discomfort that you would otherwise ignore or diminish, you will be much more likely to catch and pick up on issues that need attention within yourself. So a lot of illnesses are harder to treat and they get out of hand when people detect them too late. And that's because they're fundamentally disconnected from themselves. We can become disconnected from ourselves in so many ways. I think our life, our world is set up to lead to that kind of personal disconnection. So it happens in the form of media and social media, where we're constantly bombarded by stimuli and an overload of information, and we are acting like sponges with no sort of separation between these external inputs and our own internal sensation. We also just have this by nature of being relational beings. I see this especially common with mothers. They might have one child or multiple children, but they are taking into account the needs of their family, as well as colleagues or all the other responsibilities that might be imposing on them. They are constantly taking in information in the form of needs of the people around them, and they might lose touch with how they feel, what they think, what they want, what they are striving towards, because they no longer really know what is mine, what is the other person's. They're like a sponge to these other agendas and experiences and emotions of the people around them, and it's very hard for them to decipher what is theirs and what is somebody else's. So self-healing to me is a way of being able to check in with yourself actively and to remain attentive to what is going on with you on all the levels of your being. Now, when I say all the levels and I talk about emotional, physical, spiritual, that is something I go into detail about in my course on morning rituals for self-healing. The course is called Living by Divine Guidance. I will talk about that very shortly. But in the meantime, there are different categories that I have set out of what makes an ideal practice for daily self-healing. And it includes all of those different categories. Now, the way that you practice your spiritual housekeeping with yourself, or your emotional expression, or exercising and physical circulation in your body through breath or through movement, those applications are up to you. But I do think that there is a kind of a formula for the ideal mixture of self-healing practices, but you can find that on my course, and I highly recommend that you do, on my website, on Teachable, and I will link it below. But suffice it to say, I mean this self-healing in a very rounded way. And when we are checking in with ourselves in that way, we start to become more aware of what is mine. So it does allow that separation between I and the other in a healthy way, because you're starting your day, especially if you're doing this in the morning, but you don't have to. You at least have some point in your day where you can take responsibility essentially for what's going on in your unconscious, what emotional buildup is there. And you do, like I said before, a kind of housekeeping or an inventory of what's going on with you. So that way, when you confront things during the day, you're less likely to project something onto someone else or to feel helpless or confused. You at least have a sense of what you're dealing with. And then if there is something to work on, like let's say you have financial issues, maybe you want to hire an investment coach or a money coach, or you want to get a budgeting software. Those are action steps. And that's where you involve other people and you involve experts. It's not like you're trying to do everything on your own, but by having an approach of self-healing in one's life, we become aware of where we want to call in help or advice or guidance. So we can be proactive and receptive at the same time. Now, guidance. When I say living by divine guidance, when I talk about my course, this is like the beautiful counterweight for taking responsibility. So self-healing is taking responsibility. Living by divine guidance is realizing that we're not entirely responsible. We're not entirely in control, to say the least. And I think there's a great fear around that, but there's also a relief in that. And while it may seem as though we are helpless recipients to life and fate and destiny and all these things, or chaos or randomness, we can actually be actively receptive. So once we become aware of what's ours through rituals of self-healing, then we can actually lay that to rest a little bit and be more in flow and be more accepting and faithful and hopeful about allowing things to exist outside of our ego structure and beyond our fears and insecurities and doubts. Living by divine guidance means that there is something beyond the confining structure of our ego, our unconscious bias, and our conditioning and experience. You don't have to believe in an almighty God or a conception of a thinking universe, but I think we can all say that we have a sense of an intuition or a wise part of ourselves that will sometimes whisper to us in our lives, and either we're happy we listen to it, or else we kind of look back and think, I did hear that voice within me. Maybe it would have been good to listen to that. Why didn't I go with my first instinct? So these kind of practices are not just to connect with a spiritual source, although that is my hope that you see it that way. But if you don't want to formulate it that way, it's also a way of checking in with a part of you that knows and seems to be really on the money with its assessment of things in your life. So there's this really nice balance of I take into account what's mine, I take that on, I take responsibility, I do what I can with the things that I can control, and I do that so that I'm prepared and ready to be flexible and elastic and trusting when confronted with things that are outside of my control. And I actually am more safe in being receptive to what is, because I'm not as overwhelmed by it, because I have a strong sense of self. I'm anchored within and I have a spiritual connection. So if on the one hand we get too caught up in feeling responsible for everything in our lives, like it's all of it is on us to fix or to make better, we can easily get overwhelmed and anxious when things don't turn out our way. If on the other hand we just feel like victims of circumstance and we're just constantly trying to get advice and answers from other people, we also feel powerless, like we're just clueless, and we're just waiting for someone to, with a lab coat, to tell us what to do so that our minds can finally be at peace. Life is not about finding solace in the extremes. There are moments for extremes, that's part of moderation, but it's the nuance between these two, it's the way that they intersect and are woven together that empower us. And that is why my course is called Living by Divine Guidance, and that's why the subtitle is that it's a daily ritual, a morning routine for self-healing. So we heal ourselves, and this is actually the catchphrase of my business. We heal ourselves so that we can let go and trust divine forces to guide us towards our greatest truth. So by knowing what we can do to lead with the most clear, strong, wise, connected part of ourselves, then we can be elastic and open to experiences outside of ourselves and let them change us and transform us. And that is how we go beyond the limitations of our experience, of our ego fears, of our conditioning, and become something more than we thought possible. Now, you'll hear me talking about this idea more in the future, that I will be done, and how practicing that sentence as a way of life changed my life very profoundly. But suffice it to say, self-healing is both an act of radical self-acceptance and curiosity about oneself, just as much as it is an opening to life and an affirmation of life beyond that which we can control, and beyond the limited definition of who we think we are. So I hope that's some food for thought as I continue to share with you on self-healing. Now you'll know what I'm talking about. And as usual, please subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date with new videos, and leave in the comments below any insights that you're having. And thank you for tuning in.